Welcome to the State of Eco Horror, celebration of the release of my eco folk horror novel, CHARWOOD. For those who don't know me, I'm Josh Schlossberg. I am a horror author, creator of Josh's Worst Nightmare, where I oversee the dark landscape of biological horror fiction, whatever that means. Here's what I'm not going to talk about during this 1 hour virtual event. Not going to talk about how during my childhood in upstate New York, the frogs I used to catch started disappearing from the ponds. Not going to talk about how I gradually became aware of the global eco crisis, nor how I went to Oregon, Vermont, and Colorado to do environmental advocacy. Not going to talk about how I'm now writing eco horror fiction and hosting a podcast where I interview indie horror authors on a topic of biological horror. And I'm certainly not going to talk about the inspiration or process behind my new eco-Jewish folk horror novel, CHARWOOD, published by Aggadah Try It, available at your local bookstore, which you can order that also from bookshop.org. It's on godless.com as an ebook, Barnes & Noble, and Amazon. All this is available tomorrow. Because this event isn't actually about me or my book, it's about the state of eco-horror. So let's just get into it. All right, a quick rundown for this next hour. I'm going to show you a 1-minute trailer of CHARWOOD. It's a video trailer, 1 minute. I'm going to read 1.5 pages from the book. I know you don't want me to just drone on and on, but I have to do a little bit of that. Sorry. Then we're going to have a talk from John Baltisberger of Madness Heart Press called The Obligation to Heal the World. We're going to have Carter Soules, co-editor of Eco Horror Studies in the Anthropocene, talk about fear in nature. Jennifer Mamola of John Muir Project is going to talk about the horrific hysteria of wildfire logging. And then I'm going to have a game called Name That Forest. It's what I'm calling a stupid game with dumb prizes, hosted by Josh Schlossberg. And then Q&A. And then I think the eco-apocalypse is actually going to happen because it's starting in California right now with the hurricane. Friggin' hurricane during an earthquake. Anyway, okay, so I'm going to do a brief reading from the book right now. So this is a part where the protagonist, Orna, she is literally lost in the forest. Then something grunted from the woods. She held her breath, listening. The grunt again, actually more of a snort. She smiled. Bucks sometimes did that to warn the herd of danger. She clapped her hands to scare it away. A few seconds of silence and then more snorting, and the crunch of footsteps heading her way. Again, she clapped, but whatever it was kept coming. Spooked, she spun around and speed-walked back into the burn, aiming to circle the plantation. After maybe a minute, she stopped and cupped a hand to her ear. The footsteps closer, faster, the snorting louder. Switching to full-on flight mode, Orna barreled downhill through the burn into the dense living forest, her best bet for losing whatever was chasing her. An elk, a bear? What the hell else made sounds like that and wasn't afraid of people? The same thing that was after her the night of the accident? Branches yanked her hair and slashed her cheeks until she tripped on some root or fallen branch and tumbled face first into the soft duff. Spitting bitter pine needles from her mouth, she shoved herself up to standing, straining her ears for any sound of her pursuer. Other than the thud of her heart, silence. Whatever had been after her had given up, or more likely hadn't been chasing her at all. Unfortunately, now she had even less of an idea where she was. All she could do was head uphill, giving the plantation a wide berth and hope for the best. Otherwise, she'd have to spend the night, which, as far as she was concerned, wasn't an option. She popped on the flashlight to make sure she was going the right way. The once lovely evergreen forest now menacing. No, menacing wasn't the right word, as that would have meant it gave a crap about her. The truth, she realized with a sinking stomach, was the forest had no idea she was alive, and therefore didn't care for her any more than a gnat or pebble. Guided by the circular yellow beam, she struggled uphill back into the burnt forest until she was winded. Pausing to catch her breath, throat dry, she was relieved to see a stick lean-to propped up against a large rock. She was on the right track after all. This one was square and three-sided, not unlike a sloppy sukkah, the makeshift hut Jews built during the harvest festival of Sukkot, like the ones the ancestors made while wandering the desert. For the heck of it, she peeked inside, a body-sized depression in the thick carpet of needles, like someone had slept there. Smiling, she imagined Rowan in his sleeping bag playing Boy Scout. Towards the rear, a small pile of something. For no reason at all, she crawled into the cramped space. Just a bunch of pine cones, each the size of a child's fist, but with little white flecks in them. She picked one up and shone the light. Tucked between each of the dozens of scales were teeth. John Baltisberger is an author of speculative and genre fiction that often focuses on Jewish elements. His work has spanned extreme horror, urban fantasy, science fiction, cosmic horror, epic verse, and he has even written a guide for mindful meditation. Beyond his writing career, John is the publishing editor of Madness Heart Press, focused on transgressive and experimental horror, the Jewish speculative fiction press Aggadah Try It, and the game company Madness Heart Games. Take it over, John.
Hello, everyone. So there is a phrase common in Judaism that I love. Rabbi said you should keep a piece of paper in your hands, in your pocket rather. One side of the piece of paper says, I am but dust. And the other side of the piece of paper says, this world was made for me. And it's a practice in both humility and understanding your worth, but perhaps more than understanding your earth, understanding the importance of your presence in this world. Now, there are people who might argue or speak to that, meaning that because the world is made for us, we can use it, that animals are for eating, trees are for, shelter. However, there is another way to look at this, and I am watching the time, Josh, I promise. In Kabbalistic Judaism and mysticism and occultism, when the universe is created, Hashem, God, shrunk to make room for creation. And it's worth mentioning that in non-dual Judaism, everything is God. And so God shrunk God's self in order for God to create more God. That would be the universe that is also God and us that are also God. Yeah, levels. Those levels are, of course, the Sephirot. I say all that to say, part of that story is that when God constricted to create the universe, it shattered the world. Broken pieces of light, of divinity. Imagine a glass being stepped on at a wedding. It's broken, and there's a lot of reasons we do that, partially to scare off Shadim, partially to remember that in all things, even the most joyous things, there is also sadness and destruction, but also to mirror the creation of the world, right? When you're getting married, in theory, you're creating a new world for yourself and your family, and you shatter a thing. So the world is broken. There's a shattering that has happened. And what this means, why this has happened, is because it is our duty to put it back together. How do we put it back together? We put it back together, simply stated, through acts of loving kindness. Now, we often consider this to be things like tzedakah, or giving charity, being kind to people, meal trains, things like this, things that are kind to our fellow humans. However, in one fairly famous story, there was a rabbi, and two of his students ran in and said, "Rabbi, Rabbi, the Moshiach has come, the Messiah is here." And the rabbi looked out the window and saw two dogs fighting over a bone and said, "Nope, absolutely not. There's still fighting," because the animals were fighting, and therefore the Moshiach could not have come yet. What this tells us is that it is not just human harmony that matters. It is natural harmony as well. Tikkun Olam, which is a explicit command, right? We are meant to heal the world. Does not just mean healing people, does not just mean healing relationships, but it means creating a world that is the world to come. The world to come, paradise, is something we create. And in order to do that, we have to include the natural world as well. We have to make the world we live on, Musk, something worth living in, something that is full of harmony, something that supports nature, supports us. And, we've all, anyone my age or younger has sung the circle of life. And part of the circle of life is the natural order of things that has to be maintained. I was told I was condemned to only 5 minutes, so I will finish with this. Another famous Jewish saying is that regarding Tikkun Olam, you are not responsible for finishing the work, but you are obligated to take part in it.
Thank you, John. Thank you so much for basically tying all that stuff together and for publishing my book. I'll forever be eternally grateful for that. But John is somebody who I call the Moses of Jewish horror. He has done more for that subgenre than any 100 other people that I know of. And so I think that he's making really important contributions through his publishing and through his writing. So thanks again, John. So Carter Souls is an associate professor of film studies in the English department at SUNY Brockport. He has written on the cannibalistic hillbilly in 1970s slasher films on environmental apocalyptic themes. In 1960s horror, is co-editor with Christy Tidwell of Fear and Nature, Eco-Horror Studies in the Anthropocene, which I'm reading right now. And he is writing a book on eco-horror cinema called Approaching Eco-Horror Cinema. Carter, let's hear from you.
Thanks so much for having me, Josh, and thanks to everyone for being here. And thank you, John, for your opening comments. Very thoughtful. I want to start by saying, just as you did, Josh, what I'm not going to cover. When you asked me to sort of introduce eco-horror, or sort of say what the state of eco-horror might be, I mean, for one thing, my expertise is in cinema. And so I'm going to begin by speaking to some literary, important literary roots of eco-horror. But most of my examples and most of my talk will center on cinema. Also, I think eco-horror, as I'll say just right from the beginning, is a really big category, and it's only getting bigger in recent years and months, So by design, this is meant as to be kind of a thumbnail sketch or an introduction, but there's no way I could exhaustively play out all the various subgenres or the genre connections. And in fact, my talk is somewhat influenced by Charwood. So what I'd like to do is by the end, tie some of my comments back to how I see certain eco-horrific themes or tropes playing out in Charwood, but only in a very brief, non-spoilery way. Eco-horror is a genre or a mode built around the fear and horror that arises when humans encounter the non-human world. And that in itself is a pretty broad term, right? The non-human world. But I essentially mean that in its broadest sense. Anything not considered to be of humanity or of civilization kind of gets lumped into the non-human world. So anytime we encounter that, there's this possibility of fear and horror. And that can run a couple different ways. Sometimes we are fearful or horrified by what nature is going to do to us, right? And that's probably the most common form of eco-horror, the so-called revenge of nature style of eco-horror, where giant sharks or trees or weather or plants or whatever come after us, usually seeking bloody vengeance of some kind. But there's also the reverse of that, which is fear of what humans do to the environment or to nature. Interestingly, I think both things are present in Charwood. And I think these days, a lot of the more recent eco-horror films that I'll talk about engage usually with both of those modes at once. I would say eco-horror to some extent has its origins maybe in the literary Gothic. It may even go way before that. Obviously, the novel Charwood, among other things, shows us some of the connections possibly between eco-horror themes and the Judeo-Christian tradition and, folklore going way back. But in terms of modern eco-horror, which is actually my focus and my expertise, I'm going to say it starts with the literary Gothic. I'm thinking of Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre and the way Fog and the Moors are definitely characters in that novel. Or Algernon Blackwood, the Willows, came to mind when I was thinking of this talk, in part because it involves trees. On the American side, I might mention Edgar Allan Poe is often a key author for eco-critics. And again, that's not my expertise. I do film, but I know a lot of my colleagues work on Poe and have sort of mentioned him as a key figure in sort of an early eco-horror fiction. As far as cinema goes, I mainly want to talk tonight about films released after 1962. And that is because, here we go. While there are some important films that come before that, I would say King Kong may be chief among them. King Kong has been named by the authors of an anthology on animal horror cinema as perhaps the sort of origin point for animal horror cinema. It's one of the key texts of that. And we're still remaking King Kong endlessly, even when we're not remaking King Kong, right? Pretty much every Jurassic Park film owes some debt to King Kong. I mean, every blockbuster film owes some debt to King Kong. So at any rate, a very important eco-horror film. And as you can see from my image on the screen, this brings one of the most important motifs of eco-horror to the fore, which is that, if you will, country-city split, the city person's fear of the wilderness. And here in this image, obviously, King Kong represents that kind of wild nature. He's a wild animal of sorts, and he's invading our very civilized New York City here. But that country versus city motif, fear of wilderness, undergirds pretty much all eco-horror, right? It's that human versus non-human worlds clashing. But at any rate, Rachel Carson's Silent Spring comes out in 1962, and while it's a nonfiction work written by a biologist, it's actually in some ways a work of apocalyptic eco-horror. And if you've ever read Silent Spring, you know that it even opens, the first chapter sort of paints this picture of a little idyllic town that has lost its wildlife, and the birds don't sing anymore, and the water is polluted. So I would argue that Silent Spring is itself a work of eco-horror. I would also point to the fact that I'm not going to talk much about documentaries here, but there are many documentaries that would surely count as eco-horror. I mean, I could just rattle off a long list of those, because as I think we were joking earlier about how the hurricane is happening and the wildfires are happening, and so all of this stuff is actually happening in real life. At any rate, Silent Spring clearly inspired Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds in 1963, and I think The Birds is a very important eco-horror film because it's not like King Kong, a lost world film, right? Or not like Godzilla or the other 1950s creature features where it's usually nuclear energy that somehow creates the problem, right? Godzilla is essentially a high-powered nuclear mutant of some kind. But The Birds in 1963 introduces us to horrific protagonists or monsters, I suppose, the birds, who are just mundane average birds, right? They're not mutant. Their actions are never fully explained. Their motives are left unclear or implicit. So in a lot of ways, The Birds is one of those kind of ultimate expressions of that revenge of nature motif. Because if you've seen The Birds recently, you kind of end that movie knowing that the birds are pretty much, they're going to wipe us out. But Hitchcock is kind of brilliant in how he denies us any kind of explanation for why that's happening. So we're left to kind of chew that over on our own. All of this is preamble, though, to the moment when eco-horror as a film genre really comes to its own, which is in the 1970s. And I would argue that this is in part due to the release of Silent Spring and some of this other groundwork that I'm talking about. And in the 70s, you have a kind of long run of films that deal with these topics. Excuse me. Most of them are animal horror films, and I put Frogs up here because it's a personal favorite. And if you've never seen Frogs from 1972, I strongly recommend it. And in Frogs, the frogs and their various other reptilian and amphibious colleagues attack a bunch of overprivileged white people, in part because those white people have been polluting the local waterways. They are industrialists, and the industrial waste from their business has been polluting things. This is also a theme in 1979's Prophecy. So again, you see that human agency, human action is what provokes the attacks of the monsters and the attacks of nature. I was talking at the beginning about how this is the 2,000-pound shark in the room. Jaws is probably the most famous and profitable of all eco-horror films. I mean, maybe with the exception of Jurassic Park and some of its sequels now. But Jaws is clearly a key eco-horrific text. You got a giant shark attacking a seaside community. And the key thing that's on display in Jaws that I think is important is that the shark is a threat to capitalism. Mayor Vaughn wants to keep the beaches open because he doesn't want Amity Island to have a unprofitable summer. And so he makes some ethically shaky decisions because of the profit motive. And I think that's a really important motive, and it's a thing we see a lot in more current eco-horror as well. So I also want to note the influence of Peter Benchley's novel Jaws, which sometimes, especially in my business in film studies, gets a little overlooked. But a scholar who I like a lot, Jennifer Schell, has specifically noted that the novel Jaws is not only responsible for spawning the film and its sequels, but also is probably responsible for the other major shark genre, which is the megalodon genre, because there's a passage in Jaws where Hooper is speculating about the presence of megalodons and whether they could be out there. And of course, there's a whole body of literature and film around that now, most famously Steve Alten's Meg series, which there have now been 2 movies. The second one just came out about 3-4 weeks ago. So that passage where Hooper wonders at the possibility of megalodons could also be seen as a sort of connective tissue binding Jaws to the Jurassic Park franchise, because the megalodon belongs to an extinct species or a presumed extinct species. And so when you're dealing with Jurassic Park or the Meg or any of these kind of films, you're bringing in that motif of a de-extinct species being brought back to life or being rediscovered. And when you do that, as my colleague Christy Tidwell has pointed out, you are also always talking about the possibility of extinction for other species, especially humans, right? And in fact, these films often boil down to a kind of extinction race between the creatures that have been awakened and us. And if they survive, they're going to wipe us out for sure. So that's just another motif that's in there, along with the de-extinction plot is also connected, I think, to the Frankenstein / overreaching mad scientist plot, right? Because there's always a Hammond figure or somebody who is messing in God's domain and doing things they shouldn't be by awakening or creating these creatures. So I've mentioned animal horror. I've mentioned de-extinction films. There's a couple other subgenres I want to touch on real quickly, and I am aware that I'm down to only a few minutes here. But one of the other major subgenres, one that I'm obsessed with right now and that I've been working on a chapter about this summer, is petro-horror. That is, horrors arising specifically from the fossil fuel industry, our use of such fuels, the negative outcomes of doing so, etc. So two films that leap to mind in that respect are The Last Winter and Deepwater Horizon. But there's tons of these. Anytime you have a monstrous vehicle going around killing people, as in, say, Maximum Overdrive or Steven Spielberg's Duel or something like this, I think you're in the realm of petro-horror. Obviously, the Mad Max franchise is another important petro-horrific franchise. But I also think CHARWOOD gets in on some of the petro-horror, at least adjacent, petro-horror adjacent kind of stuff, what with the biomass and some of the other themes that the protagonists and their nemesis are engaging with. Finally, and I'm kind of heading for my conclusion now, I would be remiss if I didn't mention the rise of so-called cli-fi cinema, climate fiction, and I'm sure on the literary side, that might be a more rich, bigger deal than I'm about to make it sound. But on the film side, cli-fi and climate change cinema, obviously very important, and it kind of starts in the mid-2000s with The Day After Tomorrow, I would say, Roland Emmerich's film, which came out just a year before Al Gore's An Inconvenient Truth. So it's kind of like 05, 06 is a key turning point for cli-fi cinema. But then after that, I feel like often climate change becomes a theme that gets integrated into other cinematic genres a little more so than it really functions as a standalone genre. And as I was trying to think of other cli-fi films, what I actually ended up with were a lot of these sort of smaller, I'm going to call them artsier, I guess, or more intimate films. Ones like Take Shelter here, which again, if you've never seen, I want to strongly recommend Take Shelter. This is a wonderful film. And if you're interested in these issues, I would just strongly recommend this great movie. Beasts of the Southern Wild comes to mind in this connection. I might even mention The Happening, even though I don't know how great a film that truly is, but surely it's interested in this larger question of climate change and how it's affecting things on a kind of more of a global scale. So I will wrap up simply by mentioning a couple other key subgenres that I have had to leave out. Things like cosmic horror, I think that was mentioned earlier. There's biological horror / body horror, right? I haven't really talked about those. And then maybe the other most important genre that's directly relevant to CHARWOOD, and I'm going to stop sharing now and come back and see you all, is folk horror. And I just want to end by saying that folk horror is a huge, I know there's been a big surge in the production of folk horror texts of late and films, things like The Witch, among others, you know, and tons of others. But also it's a really big topic in terms of eco-criticism right now. Folk horror is just exploding. And in particular, there's a scholar, Dawn Keatley, and I think you can see her work for free on a website called Horror Homeroom. So if you don't know Horror Homeroom, maybe go peek at that. But Dawn Keatley is doing some really cutting edge work examining folk horror. And I think Charwood is also doing some very cutting edge work integrating eco horror with folk horror, in this case specifically Jewish folk horror. So I'll end there, and I just want to thank everyone again for listening to me for 15 minutes. Thanks.
Thank you so much. If you want to know about eco horror, deep dive analysis, Carter is your person. I am reading the text that he co-edited right now, and yeah, I'm learning a ton. It's quite fascinating. Fear in Nature, it's called. I definitely recommend it. The ebook is available and it's very affordable. So thanks again, Carter. Jennifer Mamola is the Advocacy and Policy Director with the John Muir Project. They urge Congress to work from the home out rather than the wild in order to truly prepare communities for wildfire while trying to unravel the fire-phobic rhetoric that plagues fire-adapted ecosystems such as our national forests. When not grappling with swamp creatures, she enjoys meandering through the wild, especially post-fire snag habitat as far away from a cell signal as possible. And folks might wonder, why is this presentation happening? Well, if you read Charwood, you will find out that the book is all about forests, it's about wildfire, and it's about a lot of the disinformation out there that fires are bad, we need to cut our forests and stuff like that. We need to protect our homes. We don't do that through cutting down the forest. So Jennifer's going to give a talk on that.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks so much for having me. Really appreciate it. I have the pleasure of working with Josh on the Eco Integrity Alliance and trying to band people together across the country because unfortunately, the fear of wildfire isn't just a West Coast problem. I've been working with a group in New Jersey. They're threatening to cut down 2.3 million pine trees in the name of wildfire mitigation because they don't want to end up like California. Because unfortunately, the mainstream notion is that our US forests are overstocked and therefore will inevitably lead to catastrophic wildfires that will leave moonscapes once the flames go out. But I'm here to tell you that that's not the case. Wildfire is a perfectly natural phenomenon that's been shaping our forests for millennia. And unfortunately, we're going the wrong direction. Congress a lot of the time, and I apologize, we'll be probably bashing Congress a lot in this conversation. The notion is for the last century, we've been working from the wild in rather than the home out. And right now they're trying to repackage the narrative. They're using a lot of nifty euphemisms, forest health, forest resilience. If only we managed our forests better, we wouldn't be in this predicament. But wildfires aren't a predicament. They actually are the way the first wildfires create the ecological critical first stage in multi-century life of a forest. And so I'm just going to show some pictures, kind of juxtaposition, because, I love my job, but it can get kind of depressing when you go into these post-fire habitats that they tend to salvage log. So for instance, in the bipartisan infrastructure law that was passed last Congress, the Replant Act was put in there. And the Replant Act mandates that no more than 3 years post-fire that you're gonna, they need to salvage log, because most of the time the wood that has been burnt isn't merchantable, usually about 2, sometimes 3 years, depending. But a lot of the time, that those trees may or may not be dead. A lot of them do what they call epicoric sprouting, and I'll have a couple pictures at the end. I know sequoias are in the news a lot right now, and so I'm here to try and dispel. I think the horror really is the salvage logging, as you can see in this photo from the rimfire. And then if you see in the background, actually, though, there's really nice post-fire regeneration. And so this is just right beyond that photo, the one on the left. And, these were taller than all of us that were on that field trip that day. And it was just really lovely. And it's really disturbing, though, because if you go back to this picture in areas that are salvage logged, it's noiseless. You can't really hear much. There's really no natural bird song or anything. But then once you get further and further into the natural regeneration, you find, cute little creatures because this is their habitat. Snag trees, whether they're killed by beetle bark or bark beetles rather, fire, they actually create habitat. And I don't think, most people understand that. So when we salvage log, we're removing the natural habitat for these creatures. And so it's been really, that's the bright side of the work when we get to find these, oops, I missed one. The really great habitat. So my colleague Maya Koslov found this great gray owl nest. And so the previous picture, sorry, my, oops. Oh my gosh, sorry. I'm not used to, go back. Oh, well, sorry, this is, okay. So this was the initial shot, and then she zoomed in and got this really great picture of the nesting gray owls. And then we go out into post-fire habitat and we put out wildlife cameras. And so this is just a few of the shots that we got last year of some mountain lions and Pacific fishers, but we've gotten all kinds of creatures, big and small. There was a Sierra Pacific red fox, or a Sierra red fox, which is endangered. And I think we found that one last, and I don't have that picture with me though. So, when you look at these two pictures, the public is being sold the notion on the right, when really we should be treasuring and protecting the, the moonscape that is supposedly on the left, right? And so it's just really hard because again, I'm from California. I know a lot of you are at West, and wildfires are terrifying. This is not to diminish, especially the things that we've seen in the news, Canada, Maui. This is not to diminish how horrific it can be when these things happen. 90% are human caused. So we really need to take a look at ourselves, and we really need to put a stop to human-caused wildfires, but we also need to work from the home out through a home hardening and defensible space. Dr. Jack Cohen, who's retired Forest Service, has done the studies, and no more than 100 feet out from an occupied structure, vegetation manipulation is going to prevent that structure from burning down. You need metal roofs, ember-proof vents, and then it's really the first 5 feet around the structure is the most important, and then it can kind of stagger. And it's really unfortunate because some people out in the West that I talk to, their insurance companies won't insure them, even though they're in compliance. They're like, no, everything's got to be gone from 100 feet. That is not the case. There are plenty of, like the Latuna fire in Southern California, most of that community survived because it was defended and home hardened. And so we're, our representatives and senators, I was trying not to be rude, in Congress, unfortunately spend billions of our tax dollars doing things on the right, claiming that it will save towns and communities from the inevitable wildfire. And this is not the case. And this is Lassen National Park, right? A lot of people don't understand. Like they think, oh, well, we just cut the forest down. We need wood products. We need this. We need that. But it's just to extract and sell it to the lowest bidder because they get to keep the money at the end of the day. And there's really no money in the government for home hardening and defensible space. But then, when you go into the areas that haven't been salvage logged, again, you get this biodiverse, lush landscape. And it comes back, and depending on, and most news outlets, they don't go back post-fire, right? I mean, they might go back to the neighborhoods, but they don't go back to the areas that really benefit from wildfire. And there's this other notion that mixed severity wildfire is not good for forests, but most forest habitats need mixed and high severity fire in order to reproduce nicely. I was in Yosemite last year, and this was on the valley floor. I don't know how many of you have been to Yosemite, but I was aghast. I mean, we were driving down to the valley, and there were logging trucks coming out, and I was like, what is going on? And so there was nothing on their website. And that's Half Dome in the background, and this is fire mitigation. I don't understand how something like this is going to protect my friends and family in Southern California from the next inevitable wildfire, because it's not. It's actually going to make it worse, because forest management actually spews 10 times more carbon than bark beetle and wildfires combined. So not only are we destroying animal habitat, but we're also accelerating the climate crisis by using fossil fuels to take carbon out of the ground. Because the other notion that they like to tell you is like, oh, well, you know, wildfires are carbon bombs, and if we don't manage them, then they'll just go up in smoke. I think it's Representative McClintock of California. He said if it's not going to it's either going to burn out or we're going to log it out. But that's not the case, because they did a study. Brian Baker and Chad Hansen did a study. I think it was last year, of the Dixie Fire. Less than 5%. I think the number is even lower. I think it's 2 or 3% of the biomass is actually consumed in a wildfire. It's the branches, the twigs, the duff, and the litter, and then all of that carbon is locked in. And the other notion that Congress will like to tell the public is, well, we have to go salvage log, because if we don't, that dead wood is going to then turn into a tinderbox and make the next fire even worse and more catastrophic. But again, this is animal habitat that people don't like to see. And then they go in and they salvage log. So this is Long Meadow Grove in Sequoia. And there's this notion right now that 20% of the giant sequoias have perished. And I'm sorry, I think I'm going over my 10 minutes. I thought I wouldn't, but here I am. And so I don't know if so it's a drone shot, but if you look, there's little piles. And so what they do is they cut down they take what they want, and then they strip it all and they leave it there, and then they pile burn it, and they call it prescribed fire. So that's another notion that the public is being sold. Well, we can just, you know, curb the high intensity fires if we just go in and prescribe fire more. But that's not what they're doing. They're logging and then stripping it and then pile burning and selling it as prescribed fire. So, you know, I don't know when the last forest you were in. This is also the Nelder Grove post-fire shot a colleague sent. But usually the more vegetation there is, the cooler it is. So post-fire, that looks pretty nice behind me. And then, you know, the picture on the screen, I mean, it looks pretty dry and terrible. I mean, but had they given it the time to naturally come back? So, you know, the picture on the left is epicormic sprouting from a giant sequoia, and that's just zoomed in really large. But then on the right side, you have the new tiny baby sequoias coming back. And, you know, unfortunately, there's been an emergency declaration. And so they are severely logging a lot of these groves in the name of fire. And it's a theory at this point, but with the Replant Act and the farm bills coming up, you know, the Republicans are really concerned about not salvage logging fast enough. And the Democrats are really concerned that we don't have enough seedlings in our nurseries to replant. But the thing is we don't need to replant post-fire if we just exercise a little bit of patience and we allow things to come back naturally. This was taken this June. This is one of the groves that the Forest Service and Park Service is saying they're going to salvage log and then replant. And I mean, I don't know about you, but you know, just the juxtaposition, right? I mean, for me, that's just really beautiful. Like I really wish we could get more footage of post-fire regeneration. Because again, this is what you're being sold. Like, oh, like, you know, they call this roadside logging. So, you know, we're totally fine with the notion if you're on a trail and there's a hazard tree, go ahead and cut it down. But you need to leave it there because it recycles nutrients into the forest. It is an ecosystem. But back to my kind of harebrained theory, I'm really worried that they're going to be turning our national forest into plantations when you see things like this. Because again, this is not natural to cut down and then go replant. You know, I mean, I don't like them. They're like, oh, it's going to type convert to manzanita. Those are the little bushes you see. But the thing is this takes time, right? I mean, giant sequoias are how old? Thousands of years old. It took many, many moons for them to get to this point. And we these aren't, these are two of our colleagues, Maya and Tanya. They're both biologists. I mean, those giant sequoias next to them are over 11 feet tall. No one is showing people this. And, yes, some have died. Our colleagues have said probably about 8%, not 20. And yes, that is sad, but this is nature. We all, dust to dust. Like, we have to let the new generation be ushered in. And, that's just the way it is. So sorry, that was a lot of rambling. Hopefully I can share more information on offline. I can put my information in the chat, but the crux of the story is we need to learn how to live with fire. And in order to do that, we have to work from the home out and not the wild in. And this isn't just for humans, right? This is for the creatures that have lived in these post-fire snag habitats for millennia, and if we want to save ourselves, we really need to protect not just old growth. That's been a big thing in the news recently, but we really need to protect post-fire habitat, because they're some of the most ecologically biodiverse. And if you have a chance, if you live anywhere near a post-fire area, not even just the West Coast, I implore you, go visit and take pictures and share them, and just, I bet you it's beautiful.
That was the perfect overview of the topic that I do get into more in Charwood, but yeah, get out in the woods, get out into the damn woods and see it for yourself. Thank you, Jennifer. So what I'm going to do in this game is I'm going to show you 8 slides, and in each of these slides is a photograph of a forest from somewhere in the United States. So in the chat, you need to, the first person who puts the name of the state in which the forest is wins a prize. You get 1 guess per slide. If you have multiple guesses in the chat, you will be disqualified from that round. Understand? Everyone get it? All right. So the first one, which you guess the state, you get a signed paperback of Molina, my cosmic horror novella from D&T Publishing. What state is that forest? Adam says Colorado. Tim says Colorado. Somebody says Vermont. Rachel says Colorado. Wyoming. You're all wrong. Keep going. Clue in on the background. I thought this was going to be the easy one, but all right. Alaska. No. Two guesses of Vermont. You're disqualified, Dad. Kate Harvey is correct. Kate beat Jennifer by literally a second. Sorry, Jennifer. Kate is the winner. It is New York. This is the Lake Minnewaska Preserve in the Shawangunk Mountains of New York. So Kate, message me, remind me that you won. I'm going to put it in the notes too. Kate Harvey won. Congrats. I think if somebody keeps winning a lot, I'm going to also disqualify you, so beware. All right, next slide. Name that forest. You get an ebook of Molina. Shit. Well, the first person got it, Tim. Everyone knows. How does everyone know this? Okay, well, that was good. This is supposed to be my harder one. Adam was the first one to guess. It is California. This is supposed to be hard. All right, this was the Marble Mountains Wilderness in Northern California. It's kind of a pretty obscure place that not a lot of people go, but Adam Fall won that one. Congratulations, Adam. You now have to read a book that you probably already read. So, all right, next one. This is an easy one. You get a signed paperback of Terror at 5280, Tales of Colorado Horror. All right, I can get Adam Fall abdicates the prize. I have to look that word up. All right, Jennifer got Utah right off the bat. Well played. That is definitely Utah. It's the Bryce Canyon National Park, and those are from, I think, some junipers. So well played. I want to show forests from all around. Even Utah has forests. All right, no one's going to get. All right, there's a bunch of good guesses there. Oh, Jennifer used to live there. I should disqualify her too. All right, this one, no one's going to get this. No one's going to get this one. You're not going to get this. Don't even bother. Don't even try. Missouri, nope. Oregon, nope. Montana, question mark, nope. Colorado, nope. Iowa, nope. The Shire, pretty close. Tennessee, Arizona, I knew I would defeat you on this one. Kentucky, Michigan, South Dakota, Ireland. That's not in the United States, Rachel. Our Poughkeepsie school system was not great. South Dakota, New Zealand. No, everything's going to be in the U.S. here. South Dakota, Tennessee. Remember, you only get one guess per person per slide. Idaho. No one's going to win this one. I'm going to give it another 3 guesses. We've done like 45 states. So what's left? New Mexico, no. Wyoming, no. Good. I'm glad I stumped you. Carter got it. It's the state of Washington. Well played, Carter. At the buzzer, 3-pointer at the buzzer. This is the Moran State Park on Orcas Island in Washington. Now, I picked a photo that doesn't look like that rainforest to trick you all. And I most abdicate means to give up. Now I knew new words. Thank you for that. All right, number 6. So you win an ebook of Terror at 5280, Carter. Yay for you. All right, where is this, people? Carter grew up in Washington, so it's only the people who've lived in the States know this stuff. That's fair. Utah says Tim. Carol says Hawaii, maybe now. Rami says Vermont, Death Valley, New Mexico, Nevada, Arizona. All wrong. Look at the background. That's always the hint. Colorado. Gary got it. Gary, who lives in Colorado. This is all rigged. All right. So Gary gets a. Oh, you get a signed paperback of the Jewish Book of Horror, Gary. So more punishment than prize, because I think he already has that. All right. So second to last one. You're all doing really well, though, even though I'm making fun of you. All right. Post-fire habitat. Where is this? Jennifer says California. No, Jennifer. Tim says Oregon. Tim was recently in Oregon. I know that. I follow his travels. And Tim is correct. Well played. You get an ebook of the Jewish Book of Horror. Anyone who already has the thing, I don't know, we can figure something else out. This is the Mount Jefferson Wilderness. Oh, I forgot to say, the one back here was Mount Evans Wilderness in Colorado. And that's a post-fire habitat out there. And this is Mount Jefferson Wilderness. It's just a beautiful regenerating burn. So they would have logged this and it would have looked nothing like this, but it was in the wilderness, so they let it grow. All right, here's the last one. Well, no, I've miscounted. There's 2 more. Where is this? Pennsylvania, Michigan, Maine. Wrong. I've ridiculed so many people they don't want to guess. My dad got it, Vermont. Dad is correct. Dad, you win an ebook of Charwood. Congratulations. This is old growth eastern white pines on private land in Vermont. I've found some old growth there. And we're at 6 o'clock, so I'm going to end this on the last one. All good guesses. Where is this? Signed paperback of Charwood. This is the big prize. Okay, what do we got? We got Minnesota. Good guess, but no. New Mexico. Crazy. No. The Last of Us. Maybe. I don't know. Montana. Montana. Alaska. Hidden Lake. No. Wyoming. Montana. No. So if somebody's already guessed it, it's already wrong. Maine. Wyoming. Tahoe. Ooh, close, but no. It gives me such pleasure when I'm actually defeating you. I never thought I would enjoy that so much. All right, North Dakota. Let's a few more guesses. Nope, not Missouri, not New Hampshire, not Idaho, not Wyoming. Oh, Carter got it. This is also Oregon. So we'll have to figure out a better prize for Carter because I sent him that book. But well played, Carter. Maybe I'll give the prize away to someone else. We'll figure something out for you. Awesome. Well done. Yes, I did use the same state twice, and it was a trick. So so this is actually the Mount Washington Wilderness. Game over. That was cool. That's the show. That's the State of Eco Horror. I want to thank all of my guests for speaking. It was really an honor to have them. Thanks again to John Baltisberger, Madness Heart Press, Aggadah Try It for publishing Charwood. Charwood's available right now. You can actually buy the ebook today at godless.com. The paperback is available on Monday from your local bookstore. You can order it if they don't have it, which they probably don't have it. Go to indiebound.org or bookshop.org. You can go to Barnes and Noble. You can go to Amazon. I throw copies out in the forest randomly. So thanks to everyone for showing up, of course. Really appreciate it. So many of the people here were really instrumental in getting the book out there, either through critiques or support or inspiration. So thank you for that. If anyone wants to stick around, they don't have to, but I want to open things up to Q&A. If you have any questions, comments, or only directed towards me, criticism, we have a wealth of knowledge here, not in my head, but Carter and John and Jennifer and all those folks. So how long did your book take to write? I think I knocked out the first draft in about a month, but my first drafts are garbage. And then over rewrites, I probably about 9 months, I think. So gestation of a human child. Question for Carter. Any suggestions for good works on climate change and eco-horror? That's for Carter.
And do you mean films or scholarly works of criticism? I guess that's my...
Either, she says.
Oh, yeah. On climate change and eco-horror. Well, yeah, I mean, frankly, I mentioned Take Shelter. I also would single out Beasts of the Southern Wild as being a really fantastic film that I think deals with climate change in a more nuanced and interesting way than some of the big disaster movies like the Emmerich film and things do. Criticism wise, yeah, there's been a lot on that. One of my colleagues, Steve Rust, wrote a really good piece on, I think it's just called like A Brief History of Climate Change Cinema. So his last name is Rust, and I think that's in the anthology called Eco Cinema Theory and Practice. It's from like 2013 or 14, a little ways back, but that might be a good starting point if you're interested specifically in climate change cinema.
Great to know. Any other questions? I got mine for Carter. So where do you, I want to say, like, where do you see the eco horror genre going? But I guess it's more like, my question is how to avoid the same films or books being made over and over and over again. Like, what angles can writers, authors, filmmakers incorporate to avoid just these kind of regurgitation stuff?
Maybe, I mean, this is my crass gut level answer is the lower budget, the better. I mean, those two films I just mentioned are very low budget films. And I don't want to be that guy who comes in and slags off Hollywood, but come on, we all know that Hollywood is often not so much about innovation as it is, I mean, to their credit, Hollywood certainly capitalizes on zeitgeisty, stuff of the moment. So at least that's cool. And I have noticed, like, in some kind of weird places, movies I wouldn't expect sort of acknowledging certain elements of climate change. So I mentioned I'm a shark movie fan, and I think it was Deep Blue Sea 3 from a few years back, probably 2019-ish. The whole movie, right at the beginning, they have kind of a long thing about sea level rise. And she's a video blogger. The main character is a video blogger, and she's talking, well, for those of you who live in Florida, this is going to be you in a few years. And that at the time was a very timely thing to like put into your Hollywood movie script. I'm not saying the movie Deep Blue Sea 3 does much with the notion of sea level rise or its causes or anything. The movie kind of goes on and becomes more about blowing up mutant sharks. But the fact that it's in there is noteworthy, and it's something you wouldn't have seen like 3 or 4 years before that. Maybe that's the best I can say of Hollywood. But I want to hit the ball back your way and say, frankly, the innovation is probably going to come from writers. I bet literature and people like yourself are going to be the people driving the new interesting ideas in eco horror, and then Hollywood is going to swoop in and steal it all.
I should be so lucky. So yeah, thank you. Thank you. That's a great answer to that question. So one other question here, and then we can probably call it quits, although I have something quick for Jennifer. But were there other specific Jewish horror influences to Charwood is the question of me, I assume. So, well, to be honest, it was combination. It was reading the scant amount of Jewish horror out there. There's some, you gotta find it, you gotta search it out. So John Baltisberger, who he dropped off the call, but he's my publisher. He has the Aggadah Try It, was a Jewish speculative fiction imprint of Madness Heart Press. So he's the Moses of Jewish horror. So he's been putting stuff out for a while. So I read a lot of that stuff, and then I edited an anthology, The Jewish Book of Horror. And through all the submissions, and including the ones that I published, we have at least one person who is in it. Michael Pico had a story in that. And that actually gave me a broad brush of what could be done with Jewish horror. I didn't do the editing as some expert. I was just like, there needs to be more of this. I'm going to just make more of this. So I read a bunch of stories, saw lots of different angles. Like, man, there's almost infinite ways I can do this. And then I did research. So I grew up Jewish, but not very Jewish, right? Just culturally Jewish. I went to Hebrew day school. I could half-assedly speak Hebrew. I had my bar mitzvah, all that stuff. But they didn't teach you the Kabbalah, right? The mystical texts. So I actually did some research of that somewhat recently, and I just saw how well it paired with horror, folk horror, and eco stuff, just the need to balance, basically. So that, I would say, is more how I was inspired about that. And then there's a question for Jennifer, and then maybe we'll cap it at that. Let me unmute you. So the question for Jennifer was, in New Jersey, and where's a good place to find more info about proposed tree cutting, which happens in New Jersey too?
Yeah, thanks, Carol. Sylvia with Save Sparta Mountain is working hard to combat. It's hard for me because I work more on the federal level, and so it's the New Jersey state that's threatening to do it. We've been trying to work with Booker's office, but they're also kind of bought in, unfortunately, to the fuels reduction narrative will save us. So yeah, I mean, definitely reach out to her. Feel free to let me know, or let her know that I put you in touch with her. It's kind of her side gig. As much of the people that are on the ground, they're just doing it in their free time because they've witnessed firsthand just the destruction, and they've been sold this bag of goods, and they're just seeing it firsthand that it's not what it's being sold as. But yeah, thanks, Carol. And then I can put my contact in the chat also if you want me to CC you guys on an email.
Perfect. Well, that's a great way to end this. Remember, forests are cool. Trees like us, but if we do bad things to them, they turn into Tolkien's Ents and they will kill us. So remember that. Thanks, everyone. Once again, thank you to my speakers. Thank you to all the people who showed up and all the great stuff you're doing and support and everything like that. So, amen.